Hopefully I'm unmuted now. Great. Okay. Thanks online. We'll keep plugging along here. Maybe you recognize this view. This is me a decade ago at the beautiful overlook, being a high schooler and all angsty and stuff, but fall time about a decade ago. Just cool that I have the opportunity to come back and share today. So we'll get into it. Maybe. Okay. Undergrad. So I attended University at Buffalo and I studied environmental engineering. I was there between 2014 and 2018. And during my time, I had a lot of cool experiences. You'll see pictured here, nothing from the classroom. And that is what I'd like to emphasize, because my favorite memories and experiences from undergrad were all of those hands-on club engagements, working for UB Sustainability, which is its own department on campus, and really getting my hands dirty, planting trees, doing garbage sorting, figuring out what we're really throwing out on campus. I was also able to study abroad for a very quick winter session. We went to Costa Rica, and you'll see on the bottom of the slide, me in a hard hat taking a photo. We're in a sugar refinery in that one. And then the photo of the pool is a really cool pic of one of our just kind of group gatherings. We were expected to journal while we were there, but our professor got us together and had us do some open dialogue and discussion while we were there. We got to do that poolside. So definitely encourage you to take advantage of all of Alfred University's phenomenal club, extracurricular activities that you can get into, study abroad if you're able to fit it into your schedule. Again, everything I loved about undergrad was not in the lecture hall. So then moving on, my first job was at a private engineering and architecture firm called Wendell Companies. They're headquartered out of Williamsville, New York, which is just a small suburb, a little bit north of the city of Buffalo. I started interning with them while I was in college, and that allowed me to kind of seamlessly move into a full-time position with them when I graduated in 2018. So there, I was able to really dive in and understand civil engineering, water, wastewater engineering, and kind of my tongue-in-cheek title of this presentation, From Poop to Dirt. So I was a water, wastewater engineer for Wendell and primarily worked on the wastewater side, but I did dabble in some water projects. So notably at the bottom of the screen here, you'll see a picture of some tanks. These tanks are one of them's turned over on its side. We're in the middle, or I guess the beginning of construction at that point. This is a ferric chloride system used in wastewater treatment where ferric is added to the influent, so the incoming wastewater we receive from the municipality. It's added right before it heads into the sedimentation chamber. So it's used for flocculation, which is a fun word, but basically means making particles bigger so that they'll settle out faster. So this was really the first project I got to see from start to finish. I was involved in the basis of design, meaning working with our client to understand their needs, their wishes of the project, doing that initial scoping. Well, where do we get our tanks from? How much are they going to cost? How do we estimate the contract? And then moving into full design, working with our AutoCAD drafters and our senior engineers to really understand the hydraulic implications of the system, and then into construction. So this was kind of right before I left Wendell, where construction was just about starting. We were decommissioning one of the tanks. You can see the white tank on the right-hand side is the new poly tank that is kind of staged, ready to be put into place. Notably, also on this slide, you'll see up here, this little ROV, remote operated vehicle. We shoved that thing down a bunch of water conduits at a water treatment plant. And that was more of a capital improvement project to take a look at the infrastructure, to evaluate the condition of the concrete and make sure that the funding that they were spinning up to spend at the site were being used in the most critical areas. So which tunnels needed the work fastest, basically. And then down in the lower right, you'll see a bunch of distribution pumps. Those, again, used for water distribution. So making sure we can provide appropriate pressure coming out of your tap. This was in a different municipality and a part of a small kind of substation. So boosting that water pressure up as it makes its way to the tap at the consumer. So learned a lot at Wendell. Again, really awesome opportunity to see a project through from start to finish. Much smaller projects in terms of the amount of funding or amount of money that was being spent on each of these projects, and very fast paced, very needing a lot of technical detail, and working with those senior engineers you see pictured with me to kind of increase my knowledge and learn very quickly. So here's just another quick photo, I guess, pump curve also from my Wendell time. So I was a wastewater engineer, and that means hydraulics. So I spent a lot of time, and a lot of the technical that I'm talking about is plotting system curves versus pump curves and finding your operating point, which is this little black diamond here. But basically taking a look at all of the losses through the system. So every time a pipe bends or turns, different fixtures or valves that it goes through causes pressure reduction or friction. And so matching what the system was and what the client needed versus what the manufacturer offered with the pumps that they had on their shelf readily available for purchase was a big part of what I did. And then here you'll see really cool project with an industrial client that I had looking at this Franken monster pipe gallery downstairs in a basement, trying to understand which pipes were going to what pumps. And you'll see I basically had to color code to try to chase lines and figure out where pipes were headed. And in this particular case, we were tasked with making sure the plant did not go offline at all, or I think the minimum was 4 hours of downtime. That's all that we could do. So we had to very systematically figure out which pumps to decommission, to take offline, to swap out in that short amount of time that we had, and put in the new and bring it all up to speed once again. So again, very fast paced, very dynamic environment, very technical. And then I quit my job and I bounced on the biggest bouncy house in America. And I went to San Francisco and visited my friend. And I highly suggest, if you are ever in between jobs or even after you finish school, like, take a break. Everyone needs a break. So that's all I'll say on that. And then I got hired almost on a whim by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Why do I say whim? Because my name was found on a scholarship list from University at Buffalo. And the woman who found me called me at my old job, actually, and was like, hey, are you interested in a new thing? And I was like, yes, actually, but like, can you call me later? I'm like in my cubicle trying to hide. So again, really important to take advantage of opportunities you have here at Alfred University and other experiences to really beef up your resume to get those competitive scholarships and set yourself up for success later on. So U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, what is it? It is a branch of the Department of Defense. It was actually founded by the Army in 1802. But fun fact, George Washington commissioned the first Army engineer during the Revolutionary War. So very old organization. Today, we're comprised of about 37,000 employees across the country and overseas. That includes civilians and fully, enlisted Army folk. Most of us are civilians in the Corps of Engineers. So that is something that is readily misunderstood. You don't need to enlist in the military to work for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So I am a civilian employee. You'll see here, there are, I think, 8 divisions kind of color-coded. And then there's, I believe, 36 districts. I could be wrong about that. But I zoomed in here on the Great Lakes and Ohio River Division, which is where Buffalo District is one of 7 as part of that division. So as you can see, we'll kind of dive into what Buffalo District looks like and what it does. It covers the two lower Great Lakes, so Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. So pop quiz time. All right. Raise your hand. So this is the starter round because I have another quiz question and the second question gets a prize and it is a speed round. So this is just to prime you, okay? So question, what are the USACE district boundaries based on? They're very weird shapes. Let me go back to the picture so you can see the blobbiness of the map. What do you think those district boundaries are based on, folks? Watersheds, excellent. You didn't raise your hand, but thank you. The answer is watersheds, yes. So, and fun fact also, just to confuse you a little bit more, what I'm showing you on the map is the civil works boundary. We have separate boundaries for regulatory and our military construction missions, just to make it a little more complicated. There is an interactive map online showing all USACE boundaries. So if you're like, dang, after school, I want to move like all the way to Arizona, like what district would that be in? You can go find that readily on the internet. Fun fact also, Alfred is technically within Baltimore District. Weird, I know, part of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. You can see probably some landmarks you're familiar with on your way over to Hornell, Almond Lake, Arkport Dam, and Alfred kind of being just right over here in Allegheny County, where we are today. So yeah, that's kind of an overview of the Corps of Engineers. So we'll dive in a little bit more to the Great Lakes districts. So here you'll see an image of the whole country and showing miles of coastline. And you'll see that the Great Lakes have the majority of coast, second only to Alaska. If you consider all of the land only on the American side, we have over 4,500 miles of coastline between our 5 Great Lakes. So it's an impressive watershed. It's something like the second biggest freshwater source of reservoir in like the world or something like that. I can't exactly remember the statistic, but very important resource right in our backyard in Buffalo and here too in Alfred. So here's a quick hydraulic profile. And if you're not familiar with these, basically it's showing the change in elevation as water moves from high to low. Water is always seeking the lowest possible elevation. So you can see the watershed extends to the west all the way over in Lake Superior. And then through a series of both natural and man-made, flow control structures, like our Niagara Falls being one of them, drops into the Gulf of St. Lawrence and out to the Atlantic Ocean eventually, which you probably already knew, but just important to remember the hydraulic nature of our system here. So Buffalo District, we'll dive in a little bit more to what we do. As you kind of saw in the first map there, we've got a weird shape because we follow the watershed. So anything that drains into either Lake Ontario or Lake Erie is part of our Civil Works District, which is the shading you're seeing here. It extends all the way from Toledo, Ohio to Messina, New York, up the St. Lawrence Seaway. We have a smidgen of Pennsylvania right in the middle, but most of our projects are either on the northern edge of Ohio or throughout New York State, kind of that western section of New York. Pictured here, you can see a bunch of different photos of our kinds of projects. I'll get into a little bit more detail on some of the specific projects that I've worked on, but also I wanted to note the features. So we have over 38,000 square miles within our district, 100 miles of federal channels, 16 commercial harbors, 19 recreational harbors, and 35 miles of breakwaters. So pretty significant infrastructure. A lot going on this slide. This is a snapshot of our program from 2021. You can see here our district obligate or executed. I guess the programs people really like their wordage between obligated and executed. Anyways, funding is a challenge sometimes, but we spent over $205 million in 2021. A lot of that funding was for operations and maintenance, so maintaining our federal infrastructure, those breakwaters, jetties, and piers that I mentioned from the various harbors that we have. Our program is also really big in environmental work. So there's something called the Formerly Utilized Sites Remedial Action Program, or FUSRAP. And that has a huge chunk of what Buffalo spends its time and money on, which is basically remediation of formerly used sites. So dealing with a lot of hazardous, toxic, radioactive waste, HTRW. Sorry, I had to think through that acronym for a second. That is a huge part of our program. And you can see down here, $100 million annual budget. And we have in Buffalo District alone, over 50% of health physicists in the organization. So that's nationwide. Basically meaning we're the center of expertise for HTRW work. Why is that? Well, you could think of a couple of examples, the Love Canal being one up in Niagara Falls, which you may or may not be familiar with. It started the environmental movement, was a critical piece of formalizing the EPA and Superfund as we know it today. But also the Manhattan Project, which was development of a nuclear bomb. And that kind of stuff happened within our district boundary. So that's a huge reason why we have so many folks working on HTRW projects today. That being said, I do not work in the HTRW world. I've spent very little time. I have very little knowledge on remediation. If that interests you at all, highly encourage you to seek out classes, internships. A lot of it has to do with sediment sampling, drilling, that kind of thing, looking at water sampling as well with sampling sites. But I focus more on sort of the infrastructure side in sort of navigation and ecosystem restoration. So that is kind of the crux of what I'll be talking about the rest of today on the core. But do know that if you're interested in remediation, there is a ton of opportunity to get involved and a lot of hiring actually going on from our environmental branch in Buffalo District right now and into the future. So topics of my work we'll move into, as I just mentioned, I focused a lot of my time on ecosystem restoration and invasive species control, navigation, coastal storm resiliency, and floodplain management. So here you'll see me pictured on our barge. This is our internal repair plant or floating plant as it's called. Basically, we do some of our own work with repairing and maintaining our breakwaters and depositing some of this gigantic armor stone, beefing up those structures, making sure the stone stays in place, and ensuring that commercial and recreational boater traffic is safe and can get through and commerce can proceed. So a big part of what I've spent my time on is beach erosion monitoring and sediment sampling. So I've spent a good portion of my time so far working as both a coastal engineer and coastal planner with the Corps, taking a look at active erosion and erosion management, and taking a more holistic view, understanding the system, not necessarily just the location where you're looking at the sand, but understanding how the sand is moving through the system, what effects we have on the natural environment when we, for instance, put up a jetty or a pier or breakwater, we cut off that sand supply. What does that mean for the land that's around that area? So by looking at this, we can come up with a mass balance or sediment budget. And a mass balance at its core is really looking at what is going in and out of the system, what those inputs and outputs are, and quantifying them to the best of our abilities. And believe me, quantifying is really, I'm underscoring that, it's tough when we're looking systematically across the Great Lakes. So again, we can see what areas are being accreted. So growing, you can kind of see Weston taking a little sample in his baggie here at this beach. The sand is obviously depositing here. There's a nice source of sand versus active erosion, where you can see all these trees felling and scour and some scarping going on here on the active eroding face. So a sediment budget has actually been developed for the lower Great Lakes for both Erie and Ontario. This is a little screenshot of the budget viewer, which is public information. You can Google Great Lakes sediment budget, Lake Erie, and find this viewer. And basically what you're seeing is an approximation of how sediment is moving and what cells are in balance or are gaining or losing sediment. So the blue color actually is neutral. So that's saying that that cell, which when I say cell is a 1 kilometer reach of shore, that 1 kilometer reach of shore is basically in balance. It's losing and it's gaining, and it's kind of a wash. So it's pretty stable, right? And then this purple here is showing sediment gain. So sediments are moving on the lower Great Lakes, at least for us. You see it move from west to east as the dominant wind direction blows from Toledo across Lake Erie and Lake Ontario towards Messina. So we typically see that on the western side of our jetties, piers, or breakwaters, we see sediments building up. And on the eastern side, directly abutting that opposite side of the structure, we see erosion. And Fairport Harbor, Ohio is what's kind of shown here. I know the resolution is small, so you can't really see, but there are 2 piers here that are basically for navigational purposes, making sure the wave climate is reduced so that big lake freighters can come in safely with their commodities. But that interrupts, and we know that it interrupts that dominant wind and wave direction. So here's a couple of examples of some of our navigation infrastructure I just mentioned. We have Erie West Pier in Presque Isle, Pennsylvania. Presque Isle's gorgeous. I have only been there I've only been there, actually the first time was a couple years ago. I never even went there in college or growing up, and I highly encourage you to go. It's not terribly far, maybe like 3.5, 4 hours here from here, but it's probably one of the best beaches on Lake Erie and in the Great Lakes, honestly. So here you can see an example of our West Pier. And then on the right, you'll see my friend and colleague Cedric walking on the existing breakwater, and you'll see this new kind of shiny armor stone that's being placed to protect and sort of overlay the old structure on the lakeward side to make sure that we're maintaining that. And then another thing I've been working on is beneficial use of dredged material. So what does that mean? A big part of our civil works mission is navigation, as I mentioned, to maintain those structures, to bring commodity in. But part of that too is allowing for those vessels to come in. And that means dredging, because you can think about a river system pushing sediments down to the lake. And as those sediments are pushed, they fall out of suspension and they land on the river bottom and they build up and up and up. So then when the ships come in, they need a certain amount of draft. And that would require dredging to ensure that they can safely come in without running aground. And we've had a long history of dealing with sediments, both clean and contaminated sediments. There's different ways that we handle both of those things. And how we deal with the clean sediments, and what the Corps has recently started getting smart on, is beneficially using those sediments. So instead of just tossing them out, putting them somewhere where they're not really going to have any use, putting them in a place where wetland and natural habitat can establish, and really beefing up the natural ecology in that area. And in some cases, we even might build a new small breakwater and stick the sediments behind it to ensure that they stay there where they are intended to. And then that allows, again, for recreational opportunities as well. So pretty cool, and a new way of thinking. Mostly we've thought about disposing of sediments, getting rid of them. They're unwanted, they're a nuisance, they're very costly, they're very time consuming to deal with, but rethinking how we deal with those sediments. And then another thing I'll mention is flood protection. So here we have a picture of the flood control project in Wellsville, just over the hill from us here. This was built by the Corps of Engineers, I believe in the late 70s and 80s, following that historic flood that took out the hospital, if you were aware of that or not. So this project was built by the Corps, but then a good example of one that's handed over to a local entity. In this case, I believe it's the Department of Environmental Conservation to maintain that project. And then here you'll see Mount Morris Dam, which is the only dam in Buffalo District. Depending on where you go across the country, a lot of other districts have way more dams and way more locks for navigation, but we just have the one dam in Mount Morris to protect basically the city of Rochester from flooding down the Genesee River. And then boat stuff. Woo, that's a fun part. Here you'll see some sediment sampling over on the right-hand side. So getting gooey in the Maumee River. This was for an environmental project looking at quantifying contamination and seeing what sediments are threatening the ecosystem here. This was part of a drilling contract. So in this case, we were looking at the stability of building up a facility to store contaminated sediments and making sure that that facility was stable enough. So I was out on a barge in the freezing rain in October, I think in 2020, looking at sediments there. And then all these photos down here, some days more or less exciting. My coworker likes to pick on me for this one, but basically throwing a rake and looking for invasive species on both Cayuga Lake, the Erie Canal, and a couple of reservoirs between Ohio and Pennsylvania. Which leads me to my next quiz question. And like I mentioned before, I do have a prize for whoever guesses this correctly. And if possible, I'd like the students to have the first whack at guessing. So we'll leave that there. And just shout it out. So it's a speed round. What am I? Anyone know? Anyone take? Hydrala, yes. See me after. I got something for you. Hint aquatic, yes. Hydrala is one of the most nuisance and detrimental aquatic invasive species we have in our watershed. If you're familiar at all with some of the reservoirs and inland lakes down in Florida and other places in the South, it completely takes over water. It tops out, so it grows all the way to the height of the water, and it basically chokes out other natives. It's also hugely problematic for boaters. It gets caught on their props, etc. So hydrilla is what we're looking for in these photos here. This rake is basically not necessarily topped out, but we've definitely found a patch of hydrilla there on Cayuga. And we treat for that. We have contracts every year where we're putting different herbicides in the water. They're targeted. We have rigorous monitoring to make sure that they're being applied where they should be. They're not affecting natives. And of course, property owners, recreational users are warned. There's some slight restrictions on like swimming, but it really doesn't affect municipal supply or drinking water in that way. All right, so just checking my time here. So another thing that's really interesting and just on the cusp of getting started here is a Great Lakes Coastal Resiliency Study. We actually just signed a cost share agreement with all 8 states to work on this study. It's gonna cost over $10 million. And it's really going to look at improving resiliency in the built and natural environment, looking at affected populations, infrastructure, industries, navigation, cultural and social resources, etc. And you have some stats here that I won't read to you, and we will try to see if this video will work because it's 2 minutes and I thought it was cute. All right, kind of hokey, but I thought it was a good way to demonstrate the value we add to the nation and taking a holistic view along our watershed. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention my recent, I guess, year ago deployment for Hurricane Ida. I was actually scheduled to do this lecture last fall, and I was getting on a plane instead the week that I was scheduled for. So as part of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, we have several missions with FEMA to respond to disasters. And I am part of the infrastructure assessment team where we focus on kind of 2 different buckets, water, wastewater, and structural relief and support to FEMA. And so when I was down in Louisiana last September, I saw the crazy destruction that hurricanes can bring. Here in Western New York, we're very isolated, or I guess insulated and bubble wrapped from the kind of climate catastrophes that we can see elsewhere in the world and in our own country. But just very mind-boggling for me to see some of the destruction and the impact on folks who live down there and work down there and get their livelihoods from fishing and in other industries like oil and gas, for instance. But just incredible levels of destruction. People basically digging out their whole home, just totally demolishing everything, insulation down to like the studs and putting it to the curb. And you just see boats flipped over in channels. It's really heart-wrenching, but it's a clear indication, to me at least, that climate change is not going away. And in fact, the frequency of these severe events, I think we're all kind of under the same page, is increasing. So as part of my deployment, I would go to mostly pump stations, as you see in this photo here. And we would do a rapid assessment. So we would use this program called Survey 123. This is a screenshot of the app actually I'd have on my phone with me. So kind of taking you through what it looks like a little bit. You can see I personally collected 40 wastewater pump stations when I was down there in September. So you hit collect and then you are able to locate. It locates from the GPS on your phone and you add information there about what kind of facility it is, whether it's online, offline, if there's a generator on site, et cetera. So this is really important work. It helps FEMA dictate or decide where to send resources and prioritize resources in terms of getting support and help to the local communities there. And as I'm sure you've seen in the news, Hurricane Ian just wiped through Florida. Unfortunately, really severe flooding, storm surge there. And so here's a screenshot of what we host up on our Facebook page periodically to show our efforts and how the Corps is engaged in Ian. And here you can see some of our other missions. So what I was mentioning is under the infrastructure mission. So you can see here as of 19 October, 347 assessments were requested and complete. So that would include those pump stations, also infrastructure like police stations, schools, bridges, in some cases, anything the parishes decide that they want our team to assess, we will try to assess for them. But you can also see some of these other missions that the Corps supports FEMA in. Blue roof or temporary housing is a big one. So helping folks basically protect their homes or the remainder of their roofs, getting tarps on there, and then eventual fixes, installation by government contractors. So lots of work on that one. We also have a temporary emergency power mission. So those are the generators largely that help get stuff back online while the power companies are down there trying to fix the lines. And then there's some other missions you see here. They did some beach assessments and flood fighting. So that could be dewatering. Picture if, there's a levee or berm protecting a neighborhood ordinarily, but because the storm surge is so high, I think it was like 6 feet in some cases, the water comes up and over that levee and then basically can't get out. So the Corps will assist in some of those dewatering activities as well. Okay, we're almost done. I'm going long because I like to talk, but here are some lessons learned. We're kind of switching gears, take them or leave them. This is just for me as a human being, 4 years out of undergrad, just something I thought would be good to share. So take it for me, don't skimp on your health, even just routine checkups and visits. I probably saw a dentist twice in the 4 years that I was at college, which admittedly is kind of gross. Please go see your doctor. And if you don't have a doctor here, I know it can be tough, but try to make that happen. I recently am recovering from oral surgery for a problem that has been with me for probably years that I didn't even know about until recently. And it's been a lot. And I would say health comes first in all things, even above school, above work. Make sure you're taking care of yourself. Save early. So I'm sure you know this, but it's never too soon to start saving, especially for retirement. And when you are entering the workforce, I highly recommend that you invest in whatever company, if it's your 401k or some other traditional retirement savings account. Get funding in as soon as you can and squirrel it away before the money comes out to your paycheck and you're like, oh, I have cash now. Because if you squirrel it away, you won't miss it. A lot of companies have matching, so you can make sure you get at least all of what your company will match for you with retirement and then some. So really important. Here at Alfred, if you can take a personal finance course, I would highly recommend it. I feel like I'm a dummy on personal finance. I'm still trying to figure that out. So if you have that opportunity, highly suggest you do. And then finally, get someone else to pay for your education. I didn't even mention that I finished my master's in risk management in May of this year. I did it online through Notre Dame of Maryland University, and the Army Corps paid for about 90% of that degree. They sent me to school, and so I am very thankful for the opportunity to further my education, to work and go to school at the same time and get it funded. So if you're on the fence about an advanced degree, a graduate degree, if you're not sure how you can afford it, just keep in mind, a lot of employers will help you pay for your advanced degree later. And also learn software. Michelle and I were just talking about GIS. GIS is essential for any environmental work. So if you have the opportunity to take courses in GIS now, definitely get smart on that. I wish I was smarter and had taken more courses, to be honest. And finally, USACE is hiring. So I am happy to take resumes today if you have them. I don't expect you to, but feel free to email me after this. I'm going to provide you with my contact information. Right now, there probably are going to be 2 entry-level positions opening in our regulatory branch, which I didn't talk much about, but I can give you more information on if you'd like. Those are GS7. That's typically the entry-level position with the Corps. Important for when you go on USA Jobs, which is where USACE posts all of our jobs. If you're right out of college with an undergraduate degree, it's most likely going to be a GS07. If you're looking for an internship, which we also have, look for GS04. That's typically what internships hire at. What's nice about the Corps is you can go online, you can see exactly what you're going to make at a GS7 or 4 or 11 or 15 level. And it is very cut and dry in terms of how much money you will make in your promotional ladder, if you will. We may be taking on an intern in my branch in planning for the summertime, looking for an environmental folk or economics, somebody with an economics either degree working towards their degree or even minor. We have a lot of economics work, so let me know. And then also our Facebook page is very active. We share a lot of our job postings on Facebook. and look for that little pin here in the icon. If you search on Facebook, that's a good way to know about upcoming jobs. So get in touch. Here I am. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Send me an email. Send me your resume. I'm very happy to try and connect students, set you up for success, give you my 2 cents and maybe more than that, as you've seen today. But I'll make sure that Michelle shares contact information. And then I know we're running very short on time because I'm overly talkative, but we have a few minutes left for questions. And I just like to thank you for your time. Thank you, Shannon and Michelle, for setting this up and getting me in. And yeah, I appreciate it. So that's all I have.
There's a quick question from online. They were wondering if you were deployed.
No, I haven't been. They did ask our group if we were available, and we have some folks down there on other missions other than infrastructure assessment. But other districts have been covering that so far for Ian. Yeah, that's a good question. It really depends on what branch you're in. So in planning, I don't spend a whole lot of time in the field. It might be like 15% of my time. It could be more depending on prioritization. I like helping out with Hydrala. It's fun, it's easy. We get caught in downpours on Cayuga Lake like every time I go, but it's a good time. It just depends on what other like desk work is going on. Other branches, though, are much more hands-on, like our design branch. If you're an engineer, you're a geotech, for instance, doing that drilling work, you might be out, 30 to 50% of the time. Construction is another branch I didn't even mention. They employ a lot of engineers. They're out in the field all the time. Every day they're in the field. So it really depends. Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah, so the question was, you don't have to be an engineer to work at the Corps of Engineers. Correct. We have all sorts of folks. We have administrators, we have business people, we have a whole business office. So if you're, finance and economist, you're even if you have a computer science degree, you could probably get a job with the Corps. So there's a whole breadth of career programs. I highly encourage you to go on USA Jobs. You can search by location. You can search by credential, like say I have an environmental studies degree. What does that get me? So go on USA Jobs to really hone in on what you're eligible for.
The whole video you showed clearly about adaptation and climate change, but there was not one mention of climate change. That kind of pulled out from this one period, or what that is?
That's a good question. I don't know why it was left out. I don't think it was left out intentionally. I mean, we're very much looking at climate change in terms of our predictive models on precipitation, on storm conditions, water levels, especially water levels on the Great Lakes are dynamic. We see them change kind of in a 5-year period in highs and lows. But we've seen increasing frequency of those kind of very high highs and very low lows. So it's definitely feeding that study for sure. It's a critical piece of it. As for why it wasn't in the video mentioned, I'm not quite sure, but yeah.
So you were working on it. Why were you guys working on it as a group?
Yeah, for sure. So the question was coordination between DEC and us and other agencies on the Hydrala program. So we work with both Fish and Wildlife and DEC on our New York projects, Fish and Wildlife on all the projects, as that's a federal agency as well. We have the contracting power. So a lot of times if projects require contract work to be done, it goes through the Corps just because we exercise that muscle very regularly. We have a whole contracting branch. And so we have partnerships with the DEC, and in some cases they do pay contractually for different pieces and parts. It's a definite like collaborative shared effort there, but they're always out with us in the rain for sure. Yep. PRISM is another great organization. I can't remember the acronym, but it's on the Finger Lakes and they'd have summer internships. It's environmental work and they come out and help us with Hydrala work in the summer. So that might be maybe something you look into. I wish I had the acronym for you, but I can follow up. Yeah, so we're at 1:10. Thanks again. Sorry I went kind of long, but please, if you have any questions, let me go back to my get in touch. Take a picture, write down my email. Happy to chat formally or informally. So thank you.
Thank you.